All major societal transformations unfold to the same rhythm, slowly, then suddenly. This isn't merely an observation about history, but a key to understanding the monetary world. Today's Gradually, Then Suddenly by Parker Lewis is neither an investment guide nor a prophecy, but a theoretical framework where the author traces the origins of money as a center of power and explores why Bitcoin, a seemingly fragile system, could challenge that order. This book doesn't offer ready-made answers, but compels us to re-examine seemingly immutable assumptions. What is money? How is trust maintained? And can technology truly change the foundations of society? So, if the dollar isn't the ultimate destiny of currency, if a quiet line of code on the internet is the nucleus of the next revolution, are you willing to reset your entire mindset to follow this journey? Part 1. Fundamentally, all true revolutions begin in silence. Bitcoin is no different. It didn't arrive with drums or trumpets, no proclamations from leaders. It crept through invisible lines of code, in silent, successive blocks of data. But to understand how it could emerge from nothing to become the greatest challenge to the global monetary system, we must return to the basic foundation. What is money? And why would society need a new form of it? Money, after all, is just a tool for humans to exchange value. But for thousands of years, that tool has constantly changed. Seashells, salt, livestock, gold. Each era had a dominant candidate, but one immutable law persisted. Currency tends to converge on a single form, because humans desire simplicity, a common measure. Gold was chosen because it was rare, durable, and difficult to counterfeit. It held its throne for millennia. Then convenience triumphed. People didn't want to carry heavy gold. They entrusted its safekeeping to banks. From there, promissory notes were born. "Trust us," governments said. "This paper can be exchanged for gold." Gradually, that promise was retracted. Paper became fiat money, no longer tied to gold, relying solely on faith in a central authority. But faith is the most fragile thing. When governments print more than true value, when inflation erodes every saved penny, when financial crises erupt, people begin to ask, what is money? Why does the sweat of my labor today vanish after just a few years in savings? Bitcoin emerged precisely at that moment. It made no promises. It didn't rely on governments. It presented a stark truth. There will only ever be 21 million units, never more. No exceptions, no shortcuts. This absolute scarcity is a first in human history. But Bitcoin is not just a number. It's protected by a decentralized network where millions of computers compete to validate and keep the system immune to counterfeiting. To break Bitcoin, you'd have to break that entire global network, an almost impossible feat. Bitcoin's guarantee lies not in gold or paper, but in mathematics, energy, and the immutability of its rules. From here, a new convergence begins. Society has done it with gold, with silver, with the dollar. This time, Bitcoin stands among the candidates. Initially, it was just a game for the curious, for those willing to experiment. Then, step by step, it infiltrated the minds of those who lost faith in fiat money, of those living in inflationary economies, of those yearning for a true store of value. Bitcoin faced ridicule. The press called it a bubble. Academics dismissed it as meaningless. Governments sought to ban it, but each time it was challenged, it didn't disappear, it grew stronger. Like steel forged in fire, Bitcoin absorbed adversity to become more resilient. It was in doubt that it proved its vitality. And while the world was busy arguing, Bitcoin quietly moved forward. Each new block of data, each successful transaction, was proof that it existed without needing permission. Gradually, people realized that in a world where money can be printed infinitely, Bitcoin is the only thing that stands still. A common confusion often arises. People talk about blockchain as if it's a magic wand that can solve all problems. Every business clamors to adopt blockchain. Every government boasts about its blockchain projects. But that's just the shell. Blockchain, when separated from Bitcoin, is merely a slow and expensive database, no better than existing technologies. What gives blockchain its value in Bitcoin is its purpose: to protect digital scarcity. The entire design, from its consensus mechanism to proof of work, aims to ensure that no one can counterfeit or tamper with the supply. Remove Bitcoin and blockchain loses its meaning. If you only keep blockchain without its goal of scarcity, it's just a marketing gimmick. This is where many have erred. They chase the keyword and miss the core. Then some ask what guarantees Bitcoin. It has no gold backing, no nation stands behind it. That question sounds reasonable, but reflects an outdated way of thinking. Bitcoin doesn't need to be guaranteed by an external entity. Its mathematical mechanism and the energy consumed to maintain the network are its guarantee. Each mined block is the result of millions of calculations, a real cost expended in the physical world to change a transaction. An attacker would have to spend vastly more energy and impossibility on a global scale. You might think gold is more real because you can hold it, but gold can still be confiscated, counterfeited, or replaced by promissory notes. Bitcoin, once in your wallet, cannot be erased, cannot be printed more of, cannot be controlled by anyone. Its existence doesn't depend on trust in a government, but on the global consensus of network participants. That is a new, powerful, and undeniable guarantee. But Bitcoin's true value doesn't stop at being guaranteed by energy and mathematics. It also lies in its resilience to adversity. Every time the world thought Bitcoin was dead after a price crash, a ban, a famous hacket recovered, not just recovered but advanced to a higher level. Recall how the press declared Bitcoin dead over 100 times, but instead of vanishing, it continued, block after block. Each shock didn't destroy the network but strengthened it, like a body with improved immunity after fighting off disease. This is the characteristic I call antifragile, strengthening through adversity. This is what makes Bitcoin a unique entity. It thrives on crises, and it is in this quality that we see the obsolescence of the old system. Fiat currencies increasingly rely on intervention, bailouts, and printing more money to survive. With each crisis, governments inject more money. But Bitcoin is the opposite. It has no print more button. Instead of diluting value, each fluctuation reinforces the belief that its scarcity is inviolable. The modern financial world has become overly complex. Instead of simple money used for value exchange, we are surrounded by overlapping layers of financial products: derivatives, futures, securitization. Each new layer is created as a temporary solution, but ultimately only makes the system more fragile. In that environment, Bitcoin emerges as a radical simplification. It promises no interest, issues no debt, hides no risks with complex structures. It is simply money, in the true sense of the word. You hold a portion of value that no one can dilute. No one can force you into a financial game you don't understand. This is profound. Bitcoin is the unraveling of the financialization process in which we are trapped. When money is printed infinitely, people are forced to seek refuge in assets, real estate, stocks. All become speculative channels instead of savings. People have to gamble instead of thinking long-term. They are caught in a short-term spiral. Bitcoin reverses that rule. It encourages accumulation, encourages looking to the future, because you know that today's efforts will not be stolen by inflation tomorrow. To see the difference clearly, look at everyday life in the current system. A worker who saves all their life can still lose everything because money depreciates, house prices rise, food prices increase, everything becomes more expensive while the value of their salary slowly shrinks. This is not just an economic problem, but a psychological one. People lose faith that they can control their future. Bitcoin restores that trust. It does not depend on any central bank, is not influenced by politics, makes no promises only to betray them. It is a completely transparent system where anyone can verify every transaction. There, you don't need to trust a person or an organization. You only need to trust immutable mathematical laws. And it is from this transparency that Bitcoin creates a rare fairness in the fiat money system. Those near the centers of power always benefit first: banks, financial institutions, governments. They can print more money, borrow cheaply, buy assets before prices rise. Ordinary citizens bear the inflation last. Bitcoin breaks that cycle of privilege. It opens a playing field where everyone stands at the same starting line. No one has the right to create more, no one has special privileges. A society where the value of labor is preserved, where saving becomes a virtue, where people are no longer forced into gambles to protect their wealth. That is the vision Bitcoin unveils. Of course, this transformation won't happen overnight. It happens slowly, then suddenly, individual by individual, community by community, nation by nation, they will gradually realize the advantages. The process is initially quiet, but once it reaches a tipping point, nothing can stop it. Every transformation is met with resistance. Those who benefit most from the current system will be the strongest opponents. Central banks worry their power to issue money will be neutralized. Governments fear losing their tools to control the economy. Traditional financiers are wary of a system that operates without intermediaries. But history shows that when superior technology emerges, no power is strong enough to stop it. Remember the early days of the internet. It was considered a game for weirdos, deemed useless, even dangerous, but the internet continued to grow because it met human needs more effectively. Bitcoin is following that path. First a joke, then a tool for a small group, then gradually becoming the infrastructure for the entire world. In this process, adversity is the catalyst. Every time Bitcoin's price drops, people gloat, declaring it dead, but then it recovers stronger. Every time governments ban it, the flow simply redirects, becoming harder to control. Every time an exchange collapses, the community learns to protect itself better. All these shocks don't weaken Bitcoin but make it more robust. This is the antifragile property, a concept rarely seen in human-made systems. The old system is inherently fragile. A single wrong decision by a central bank can plunge an entire economy into crisis. Bitcoin, conversely, proves its strength the more it is challenged. It needs no bailouts, no recapitalization, no external intervention. It exists thanks to global decentralization and consensus, an almost indestructible mechanism. You might think Bitcoin is too small to replace the entire monetary system, but remember, gold was once just a metal in the hands of craftsmen. The dollar was once just scorned paper notes. The convergence of currency always follows a ruthless logic. When a superior candidate emerges, it slowly attracts trust, then suddenly becomes the default. It is in this shift that we clearly see a paradox. Those who ridicule Bitcoin today may reluctantly use it tomorrow. Just as journalists who mocked email eventually had to use email to survive, history always repeats itself. Initial skepticism is just a stepping stone to eventual acceptance. Bitcoin is not just a technology, it's an inversion. It transforms the dollar, once considered the global standard, into a variable. While the dollar increasingly loses value due to reckless printing, Bitcoin becomes the sole constant, 21 million. And when there is a constant, people will gradually use it to measure everything else. That is how a new order forms. When we look at today's financial system, we see a colossal paradox. The more layers of intermediaries, the more derivative instruments, the more regulatory mechanisms, the more insecure people become with their own money. Instead of being a solid foundation, money has become a game of debt and speculation. Bitcoin offers an opposite path. It strips away the accumulated layers, returning money to its core purpose, a means of storing and exchanging value. That's why I call Bitcoin the unraveling of financialization. It doesn't encourage complex speculation, nor does it create murky derivative instruments. It encourages saving. It makes saving a virtue. Because every Satoshi you hold today will retain its value, even increasing as the world continues to print more fiat money. This isn't just a change in how we transact, but a change in how we think about the future. When people believe their money will retain its value, they start living differently. They dare to plan long-term, dare to invest in genuinely sustainable projects. Instead of chasing short-term profits, society becomes more stable because its root faith in money has solidified. And like all historical processes, this change doesn't happen by decree. It happens by voluntary conviction. Individuals, communities, nations will choose Bitcoin for practical benefits, because they want to protect the value of their labor, because they want a fair system, because they no longer believe political promises. That choice, once large enough, will create a global convergence. Bitcoin gradually makes other currencies obsolete because of its absolute scarcity. Bitcoin is not an empty blockchain, but the sole purpose that gives blockchain meaning. Bitcoin doesn't need to be guaranteed by gold or governments because energy and mathematics are its strongest guarantees. Bitcoin is not weak. It strengthens through adversity, becoming the most resilient system humanity has ever created. Bitcoin is the unraveling of financialization, returning money to its true nature, ushering in a society where saving is respected and fairness restored. An inevitable convergence, it will unfold like every revolution before it slowly, almost invisibly, until one day everyone suddenly realizes the world has changed. And when that moment arrives, the question won't be, can Bitcoin survive? But how could we ever have thought it couldn't? Part 2, Common Misconceptions. Every great idea must traverse a thorny path, from being ridiculed to being attacked, and finally becoming self-evident. Bitcoin has not escaped this rule. From its earliest days, it has been surrounded by all sorts of misunderstandings. Every question, every criticism, was like a knife aimed at a nascent organism. But it was in confronting these misunderstandings that Bitcoin gradually proved its true nature. One of the biggest misconceptions is that Bitcoin can be copied. People argue that if Bitcoin is just software, anyone can create a copy, give it a new name, and sell it. And it's true that thousands of different versions have appeared, from bizarre altcoins to ambitious blockchain projects. But all of them fail on one crucial point: trust and convergence. Scarcity cannot be duplicated, just like gold. Once society has converged on gold as a standard, no other metal, however similarly rare, can replace it. Bitcoin is a unique event, the first and only digital scarcity. All copies are merely echoes. Then some say Bitcoin is too volatile to be money. They look at its wild price swings, considering them proof that Bitcoin will never be stable enough to act as a store of value. But volatility is precisely a sign of a convergence process in its early stages. When the market size is small, Bitcoin's value naturally fluctuates sharply, but over each cycle, the lows are higher than the previous highs, and gradually the volatility curve will narrow. Volatility is not an inherent flaw, but the growing pains of a new monetary system. Another familiar attack is that Bitcoin wastes energy. The press often cites colossal figures, comparing Bitcoin mining to the electricity consumption of an entire nation. But what they overlook is that true scarcity always requires a true cost. Gold became money because it was hard to extract, because sweat and labor had to be poured into the earth. Bitcoin is no different, but instead of picks and gold mines, people use energy and computers. That cost is the shield protecting the network. A monetary system that costs nothing to maintain will be a system without value. The price of Bitcoin, the energy consumed, is what makes it immune to counterfeiting. Others criticize Bitcoin as too slow, with high transaction fees, unable to compete with Visa or MasterCard. They equate Bitcoin with a payment system and thus deem it a failed product. But Bitcoin was never designed to be the new Visa. Its core innovation lies in its fixed supply, its absolute scarcity, not in its processing speed. Payments can be built on secondary layers, like the Lightning Network, but the essence of money only needs an immutable foundation. Speed is just the surface layer, scarcity is the soul. Some also brand Bitcoin with a dark label: criminal money. Yes, criminals can use Bitcoin, just as they have used gold, dollars, or any other medium of exchange. But to use that as a reason for repudiation would be like rejecting all knives just because someone uses one to commit a crime. A censorship-resistant, decentralized system will inevitably be used by all types of people, good and bad alike. The issue is not the tool but human behavior. And in reality, compared to the vast volume of financial crime committed with dollars, Bitcoin is but a drop in the ocean. One of the most persistent criticisms is that Bitcoin can be banned. The argument sounds plausible. If governments don't want a currency competing with their national currency, they just need to ban it, shut down exchanges, imprison users. But people forget that Bitcoin does not exist on a single server, nor does it have a central office for police to raid. It exists on tens of thousands of network nodes worldwide. Each node is a complete copy of the entire system. To abolish Bitcoin, you'd have to simultaneously wipe out all those computers, an impossibility. Even if one country bans it, the network lives on elsewhere, and thanks to the internet, it creeps back in. History has proven this. Wherever local currency collapses, Bitcoin becomes more popular. Wherever it's banned, Bitcoin is traded on black markets, then gradually formalizes. A ban only makes it harder to access in the short term, but in the long run, that very adversity reinforces its core value. It cannot be controlled. Another common misconception in traditional finance circles is that Bitcoin is a pyramid scheme. They argue that early entrants benefit by selling to later entrants, a structure based on greed rather than true value. But the fundamental difference here is the fixed supply. In a scam, those at the center constantly print more tokens, constantly dilute to drain value from later participants. With Bitcoin, no one can create more than 21 million units. This scarcity collapses the entire pyramid argument. Later entrants don't feed earlier entrants. Instead, everyone shares the same unchanging value foundation. While a scam thrives only as long as new money flows in, Bitcoin exists thanks to a truly useful network, a network that protects digital scarcity. Anyone who participates benefits from network effects, security, and transparency. These are not empty promises, but tangible values. All these misconceptions, from being copied, volatility, wastefulness, slowness, criminality, being banned, to being a pyramid scheme, share a common thread. They stem from viewing Bitcoin through an old lens. People accustomed to fiat systems impose those standards on Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is not a patch for the old system. It is an entirely new order. Someone in the 19th century criticizing the telephone because it didn't send letters, or someone criticizing a car because it didn't eat grass like a horse. These misconceptions sound ridiculous today. But at the time, they reflected fear of change. Bitcoin is no different. It is criticized not because it is illogical, but because it is too new. Each attack, instead of killing Bitcoin, clarified its nature. Each misconception was refuted not just by theory but by practice. Cycle after cycle, Bitcoin lived, grew stronger, proving it was no illusion. When people say Bitcoin can be copied, they often mention thousands of alternative coins, from colorful names to projects promising to surpass Bitcoin. But there's a stark reality. None of them have achieved the same convergence effect as Bitcoin. The value of money lies not in mere technology but in collective trust. Once society has chosen, the convergence process becomes irreversible. You can create millions of copies of Bitcoin, but you cannot copy the trust solidified over more than a decade. That is what every altcoin lacks: history and legitimacy. Even critics must concede a hard truth. Bitcoin is the only asset in the digital world with an absolutely fixed supply. Everything else can be adjusted, new coins added, algorithms changed, rules modified. But not Bitcoin. The price paid for this conservatism is a slow rate of change. But that very slowness is proof of stability. You cannot want an immutable system and also demand rapid innovation. Regarding price volatility, perhaps nothing pleases the press more than reporting on Bitcoin's freefall. Every time the price drops, sensational headlines flood the news. Bubble burst, the end is nigh. But the strange thing is that after each fall, Bitcoin doesn't die, it returns stronger. If an asset truly only lived on blind faith, it would have collapsed after the first drop. Volatility, instead of being proof of fragility, is proof of life. It's like the ocean. It has waves, it has storms, but the ocean never runs dry. The misconception about energy is similar. Critics love to compare Bitcoin's electricity consumption to that of entire nations, but they forget to compare it to the current system. The entire network of banks, treasuries, ATMs, data centers all consume enormous amounts of energy. And the biggest difference: the energy used for Bitcoin is not wasted. It is transformed into security, into immutability. That is the necessary cost to ensure no one can create a fake coin. In the physical world, everything precious has a price to pay. Bitcoin is no exception. Interestingly, the very mechanism of energy consumption makes Bitcoin an ultimate consumer for surplus energy in places where electricity is wasted or even discarded because it cannot be transmitted. Bitcoin mining leverages this. Paradoxically, what is deemed wasteful can become a driver for renewable energy. As for speed, comparing Bitcoin to Visa is like comparing a national gold reserve to a supermarket cash register. Bitcoin's core function is not to process thousands of transactions per second, but to preserve value over time. Visa may be fast, but it cannot maintain value. Bitcoin may be slow, but it is the immutable foundation upon which other payment layers can be built. That is the difference between a base layer of value and a utility layer of payment. There is an image often used to denigrate Bitcoin: money for criminals. Yes, there was a time when online black markets accepted Bitcoin, and that became fertile ground for the press. But look closer. Any currency that has ever served as money has also been used by criminals. Gold was smuggled, the dollar became a global money laundering tool, credit cards are exploited daily. If we measure the value of money by how bad actors use it, then no currency deserves to exist. Bitcoin's distinction is that it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't ask who you are, doesn't demand proof of anything. It simply knows that a valid transaction will be recorded. That is the nature of a censorship-resistant system. And this characteristic, far from being a weakness, is a strength. Because at the same time, it also protects good people, those living under dictatorships, those denied access to banking. Bitcoin is a place where they can store value without fear of confiscation. The misconception that Bitcoin can be banned is also frequently repeated. It's true that governments can restrict, even make it difficult, to buy and sell Bitcoin in the short term. But no government can extinguish a network distributed across the planet. To ban it completely, they would have to shut down the entire internet, hunt down every computer, every person, an impossibility in an open world. The irony is that each ban only further proves Bitcoin's strength. When something persists despite being banned, it becomes even more trustworthy. Finally, there's the seemingly logical argument. Bitcoin is a pyramid scheme, a scam. People look at the value increasing with the number of participants and assume it's a multi-level structure. But the core difference lies in the fixed supply. In any fraudulent scheme, the orchestrators always have the power to issue more, always have the ability to profit from later entrants. Bitcoin does not. No one can print more, no one holds special privileges. Everyone plays by the same rules. Early and late entrants share an unchanging foundation, 21 million units. Moreover, a pyramid scheme only exists as long as new money flows in. Stop that, and it collapses. Bitcoin, however, exists not because of promises of profit, but because of a genuinely useful network, its security, decentralization, and absolute scarcity. These very factors have allowed it to survive for over a decade, despite countless declarations of its demise. Each misconception, instead of extinguishing Bitcoin, was like a litmus test. And Bitcoin, after each challenge, emerged stronger like metal forged in fire. The accusations exist only on the surface, while the core value remains unshaken. Looking back at all the common misconceptions surrounding Bitcoin, we see an interesting picture. Each attack reflects how people view it through the lens of the old system. They criticize Bitcoin because it doesn't resemble what they're used to. It's not as fast as Visa, has no backing like gold, isn't as stable as the dollar they trust. But that very difference is why Bitcoin exists. If it were identical, there would be nothing to discuss. It's in the process of refutation that we better understand Bitcoin's nature. It cannot be copied because scarcity happens only once. It doesn't die from volatility because volatility is just the growing pains of a new system. It doesn't waste energy because energy is the price paid for true scarcity. It's not slow and useless because speed isn't the soul of money. It's not a tool exclusively for criminals, but a fair medium for all people. It cannot be banned because there's no central authority to shut down. And finally, it's not a pyramid scheme because no one can print more to defraud later entrants. Every criticism, every misunderstanding, is like a wave crashing against the shore. If a stone were weak, it would have been eroded and vanished. But Bitcoin doesn't disappear. Instead, it stands firmer after each wave. And as time passes, that stone gradually reveals its true nature, not an illusion, but a new foundation. Resistance is not a sign of failure, but a sign of vitality. If Bitcoin were truly meaningless, it would have vanished long ago, buried in oblivion. But for over a decade, it has persisted, shaking systems, making the whole world debate. That is the greatest proof that Bitcoin is not a joke but a shaping reality, and like every revolution, initially people deny, then ridicule, then oppose, but eventually, those who once resisted will use it as if they had never said otherwise. Part 3: Bitcoin versus the dollar. We live in a world where the US dollar seems an undeniable truth. Every international transaction, every foreign exchange reserve, every value comparison revolves around it. But few stop to ask why the dollar holds this position and if it can maintain it indefinitely. The answer begins with a major event of the 20th century. The dollar became the reserve currency after World War II, tied to gold under the Bretton Woods system. The promise then was that every dollar could be exchanged for gold. This trust led the world to accept the dollar as a standard. But in 1971, that promise was broken. President Nixon declared an end to dollar-to-gold convertibility. From that moment, the dollar was no longer tied to any tangible object. It existed purely on faith. And from that moment, a new machine was set in motion, the infinite money printing machine. Whenever a crisis erupted, governments were no longer bound by gold. They could print more dollars to solve problems. Public debt skyrocketed, inflation became a constant specter. The system, designed to operate through continuous loosening, led to a steady decline in the dollar's value. Bitcoin emerged as a natural reaction to that machine. It stated a simple fact: there will never be more than 21 million bitcoins. No exceptions, no phone call from a politician can change it. This fixed supply is in absolute opposition to the dollar. While the dollar is printed infinitely, Bitcoin remains constant. While the dollar encourages debt and overspending, Bitcoin encourages saving and accumulation. People might scoff at Bitcoin for its volatile price, but few realize the true instability lies in the dollar. Because when the currency you use to measure value constantly changes, everything else becomes vague. Bitcoin offers a constant, and when there is a constant, society will gradually measure everything based on it. But Bitcoin is not just an economic tool, it is also a movement. Every person choosing to hold Bitcoin is performing a silent act of resistance, refusing to be trapped in the dollar system. No protests needed, no slogans, just buy and hold. Every Satoshi is a vote against inflation, against the privilege of printing money. That's why I call Bitcoin a rally cry, a collective call. It belongs to no nation, needs no one's permission. It belongs to anyone brave enough to say, I choose a different path. Holding Bitcoin is no longer a risky decision. In a context where fiat money is printed infinitely, not holding Bitcoin is the real risk. Choosing Bitcoin, ultimately, is just common sense, like knowing water flows downhill, knowing the sun will rise tomorrow. You also know that the dollar will continue to lose value. In that world, Bitcoin is the only lifeboat floating on the water. Bitcoin is one for all, on for all in contrast to the dollar system. Benefits in the dollar system concentrate on those closest to the source of money issuance: banks, governments, financial elites. With Bitcoin, no one has special privileges. Wherever you are, rich or poor, all you need is a phone and internet connection. You have the same rights as anyone else. That is an unprecedented equality in monetary history. If we look deeply, we will see that the US dollar is not just a currency, it is a tool of power. When the US prints more dollars, they not only create domestic inflation, but also export it globally, because most international commodities, oil, food, metals are priced in dollars. Other countries are forced to hoard dollars to maintain trade, and it is in that dependency that they bear the consequences. In other words, the dollar is a monetary empire. It allows the US to borrow and spend far beyond its real capabilities, because the whole world is willing to accept the papers printed in Washington. But every empire eventually declines because its roots are based on imbalance. One side spends, the other pays the price. Bitcoin emerges as an option to break free from that cycle. When you hold Bitcoin, you are no longer forced to trust the US central bank, no longer dependent on the promises of any government. Bitcoin offers a cold truth, absolute scarcity. It doesn't ask for opinions, doesn't negotiate. It exists beyond all political borders. Therefore, it becomes the only possible escape for those weary of the dollar system. An ordinary person in Venezuela, where currency loses value by the hour, where inflation is not an academic concept, but immediate hunger, they witness the bolivar turn into scrap paper and the dollar become a temporary lifeline. But even the dollar is just a thin veneer, because they know the US can print more anytime. In that world, Bitcoin is not a distant dream, but a matter of survival. It is a way to preserve the fruits of their labor without fear of annihilation overnight. The irony is that while Western media ridicules Bitcoin, in places where currency collapses, it becomes a source of hope. When people lose faith in local currency, they turn to the dollar. But when faith in the dollar also wavers, they turn to Bitcoin, and from there, a new convergence is activated, not by decree but by voluntary choice. This voluntarism is the true strength. No one forces you to use Bitcoin. But when you witness the value of your labor stolen by inflation, you ask yourself, is there any other option? Bitcoin whispers the answer, yes. And once you've experienced it, it's hard to go back. I call it common sense. Because in a world where all currencies can be printed infinitely, holding a currency that cannot be printed is the simplest decision. This simplicity, in turn, becomes its strength. All previous monetary systems complicated the issue: reserve requirements, interest rate policies, bailout packages, foreign exchange interventions. Bitcoin abolishes all of that. It retains only one principle: fixed supply. As people gradually realize this, they won't need to read more theories, won't need philosophical debates. They just need to look at the reality. The dollar loses value, Bitcoin doesn't. The choice slowly becomes obvious. The dollar system, with its stable appearance, is in fact operated by increasingly complex layers of patches. Every time a crisis erupts, governments and central banks have to devise an emergency solution: lower interest rates, quantitative easing, bailout packages. But these solutions never end the problem. They only postpone it, making the burden heavier. Like an addict relying on painkillers, each dose temporarily numbs the pain, but the underlying disease worsens. This is the paradox of the fiat system. It creates crises, then assumes the role of savior. The dollar becomes the center of an endless spiral in which value is constantly eroded to nourish the illusion of stability. Bitcoin breaks this paradox with an almost brutal simplicity. No printing more, no bailouts, no recapitalization, no room for arbitrary power. That's why it's called common sense. It's like acknowledging that solid ground is firmer than quicksand, that a bridge built on rock is sturdier than one built on mud. No complex innovations needed, just adhering to fundamental principles. But it is in that very simplicity that Bitcoin becomes a collective call, a rally cry, because everyone who holds Bitcoin not only protects their personal value, but also contributes to creating a fairer system for all. Consider a family in the US saving their entire lives hoping their children will have a better future. Each year, they see the money in their accounts gnawed away by inflation. They try to invest, but risky financial products only add to their insecurity. When they turn to Bitcoin, it's not a gamble but a form of self-protection. They store their hard-earned money in an asset that no one can print more of. That is a silent but powerful act of resistance. Or think of a young person in Africa, where traditional banking is a luxury, where local currency constantly depreciates. With a cheap smartphone, they can download a Bitcoin wallet and participate in a global financial system. No one asks if they have a passport, bank statements. No one rejects them for not meeting standards. In Bitcoin, they are equal to anyone, from Wall Street to a small farmer. That is, one for all. This equality has never existed in monetary history. All previous systems had centers of power where privilege concentrated. Bitcoin disperses that privilege globally. No one has an advantage over another. Each mind block is proof that the rules apply equally to everyone. Some might argue this is a dream, but look back at history. Every currency that achieved dominance relied on gradual convergence. Silver was replaced by gold. Gold was replaced by the dollar, and now the dollar faces an untamperable adversary: Bitcoin. This process won't happen overnight. It will unfold quietly, step by step, until one day, everyone realizes the order has shifted. Whenever Bitcoin is mentioned as a rival to the dollar, people often counter. The dollar has a government, an army, decades of history. Bitcoin is just computer code. At first glance, it's an overwhelming comparison, but true power lies not in armies or politics but in collective trust. Once trust in the dollar wavers, no army is strong enough to force the world to continue using it. The truth is, the dollar has been diluted too many times. Since 1971, when it was no longer tied to gold, the money supply has increased at an unprecedented rate. Every crisis, the central bank injects more. Governments spend beyond budget, public debt piles up. Trillions become commonplace, and each new trillion printed means a further cut into the accumulated value of the people. Bitcoin stands in complete opposition. No one can rewrite the rules, no one can decide to print more. This is not just a technical difference but a philosophical one. It strips the power to manipulate money from a small group and returns it to immutable laws. It is this immutability that creates true fairness. Look at a society consumed by inflation. The wealthy, who own assets, can evade it by buying real estate, stocks, gold. But the poor, holding fiat currency, are the first to suffer. It's a cruel hidden tax, levied on those least able to defend themselves. Bitcoin breaks this vicious cycle. It allows anyone with even a small amount of capital to access an asset that cannot be diluted. Whether you hold one Bitcoin or a tiny fraction, the rules of the game are the same. This is the meaning of one for all. In the dollar system, privilege always exists. In the Bitcoin system, no one can change the rules to gain an advantage. It's a rare level playing field in history. This equality makes Bitcoin a rally cry, a collective call that transcends borders. When you hold Bitcoin, you not only protect yourself, but also contribute to proving that another, fairer, more viable system exists. And when many people act together, that call becomes a movement. The most frightening thing for the old system is not Bitcoin's technology, but the inevitability of convergence. Small individuals across the globe make logical decisions for themselves. I want to store value where it cannot be printed more of. Each such decision combines to form an unstoppable wave. And this is the great paradox. Bitcoin doesn't need to defeat the dollar by force. It just needs to stand there with its fixed supply, awaiting the natural collapse of faith in fiat money. As the dollar is increasingly printed, as inflation continues to erode, the shift to Bitcoin is not a question of if, but when. In a world accustomed to living with the dollar, Bitcoin initially appeared as a peculiar joke. But increasingly, the contrast between the two systems became clear. The dollar is the currency of arbitrary discretion. Its quantity can increase at political will. Bitcoin is the currency of principles. No one, not even its creator, can print even one more coin. The dollar is maintained by enforced trust. Every nation must hoard it. International trade is forced to use it. Bitcoin is maintained by voluntary choice. Whoever wants to participate does, whoever doesn't stays out. But paradoxically, this very voluntarism is more sustainable than any coercion. Some say Bitcoin is too small. How can it replace a colossal system like the dollar? But remember, gold was once just a metal in the hands of craftsmen. Paper money was once just scorned notes. Every dominant currency started as an outsider. Convergence comes from time and network effects, not from decrees, and Bitcoin is accumulating both every day. We see it in large corporations starting to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheets, in investment funds viewing Bitcoin as a hedge asset, in nations struggling with inflation seeking to legalize Bitcoin to protect their citizens. Step by step, the order shifts. First, it's a small individual choice, then a corporate trend, then a national decision. Bitcoin, therefore, is not just a financial tool, it is a measure of fairness. In a system where currency is printed infinitely, power belongs to those closest to the source of issuance. In Bitcoin, power is nullified, only immutable principles remain. A child in Africa and a financier on Wall Street both abide by the same rules, that is unprecedented equality. When we understand this, we clearly see that Bitcoin is not just an economic solution, but a moral one. It restores fairness to labor, to savings, to trust. It ends the hidden tax of inflation that burdens the most vulnerable. It offers a choice, an escape. Bitcoin versus the dollar is not a technological war, but a war of trust. One side relies on coercive power, the other on voluntary choice. One prints infinitely, the other is absolutely limited. One fosters injustice, the other restores fairness. The dollar will not collapse overnight, but the erosion of trust will lead to an inevitable replacement. Bitcoin will not rush to claim the throne, but it will quietly solidify its position. And one day, the world will wake up to realize that the convergence has happened, slowly, then suddenly. Part 4, Conclusion and Acknowledgements. Everything happens slowly, then suddenly. This is not just the title of this series of essays, but also the lens through which to view monetary history and Bitcoin. Initially, it was just a strange idea spreading in small corners of the internet, dismissed as a hobby for dreamers. Its price was once only a few cents, then a few dollars, and when it rose slightly, the press quickly called it a bubble. Year after year, people continuously declared Bitcoin dead, but Bitcoin didn't die. It persisted, growing stronger. And it is in that persistence that we see the rule: currency replacement does not happen overnight. It is a quiet, subtle process. Then, at a certain moment, everything changes. When looking at the dollar, we see a money-printing machine that has reached its limit. No currency in history can maintain its strength indefinitely when printed infinitely. Lessons from the Roman Empire, from European monarchies, from every economy that ever tried to print money to conceal the truth all lead to the same outcome: the collapse of trust. The dollar is no exception. The only difference is that this time, the world has an escape: Bitcoin. I'm not writing this to paint a rosy picture. I understand that Bitcoin is still nascent, still facing many challenges. Price volatility, criticism, bans all are still there. But I also understand that no technology has ever brought such a fair monetary order. 21 million units, an immutable limit, has changed all the rules of the game. No longer can a small group print more, no longer are there privileges to dilute the value of billions of people's labor. Bitcoin does not promise a perfect world, but it opens up a fairer world where your value cannot be erased just because someone at the center of power decides to print a few more trillions. A world where a child in Africa, a laborer in South America, an entrepreneur in Europe are all equal in the same system. That is a simple yet revolutionary dream. Should I try holding a little Bitcoin? Does this make sense? And then, over time, the answer resonates into a global movement. One day, we will step into the moment of certainty, when Bitcoin is no longer an exception but becomes the center. Then the question will no longer be, will Bitcoin succeed? But how could we ever have thought it couldn't? I recall the first time I read Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper, a concise document, unembellished, with no grand words, just a cold combination of logic and technology. Yet, hidden beneath those dry words was a seed that would shake the foundations of global finance. Satoshi promised no riches, called for no overthrow. He simply proposed a peer-to-peer electronic cash system that required no trusted third party. From there, a new door opened. At first, only a few stepped in: programmers, cryptology enthusiasts, a few thinkers skeptical of fiat systems. They were considered oddities, but it was they who kept the flame alive. Then the circle widened: venture capitalists, small businesses, people in places crushed by inflation. Eventually, even publicly listed companies on Wall Street and even governments began to pay attention. That is the gradually journey, individual by individual, organization by organization, nation by nation, choosing Bitcoin step by step. No one can pinpoint the exact day it began, nor can anyone stop it. And that is what makes me believe Bitcoin is not a minority movement but a natural process of convergence. Meanwhile, the old system increasingly reveals its fragility. Trillion-dollar bailouts, emergency interest rate cuts, successive crises all show that the dollar is no longer a solid foundation. It's just a ship constantly patching itself while water continues to leak in. Bitcoin needs to promise nothing. It just stands there with an immutable principle: 21 million. That principle cares nothing for election cycles, depends on no one sitting in the Fed chairman's seat. And it is this impartiality that makes it more trustworthy than any other human-operated system. I've heard many people say Bitcoin is too small to matter, but those same people, a few years later, started asking how to buy Bitcoin. Change doesn't come from a speech but from personal experience. When they see their money lose value, when they see prices of goods skyrocket, when they see their labor eroded, they start looking at Bitcoin. That is not theory but survival instinct. And once they've stepped through that door, it's hard to go back because they realize the profound difference. Bitcoin doesn't demand blind faith. Bitcoin allows them to verify for themselves. They no longer depend on promises but can verify transactions themselves, hold their own private keys. That is true power. What many have yet to realize is that Bitcoin is not just a new financial system, but also a measure of truth in a world where information is distorted, where statistics can be bent to serve political ends. Bitcoin, however, lays bare the truth directly. Its supply cannot be hidden, transactions cannot be erased, its history cannot be rewritten. It is here that Bitcoin touches a deeper layer of meaning. It not only restores control over value, but also restores control over truth. Each mind block is like a page of history carved in stone. And once carved, it becomes immutable. We live in an era where truth is easily manipulated, but Bitcoin creates a neutral ground where anyone can verify without having to trust any gatekeeper. I remember once talking to a friend in a country that experienced hyperinflation. He recounted, "We used to hold money printed in the morning. By noon, it had lost half its value. By evening, there was nothing left." In such circumstances, people learn one thing: money only has value if trust still exists. And when trust is lost, no gun, no promise can save it. Bitcoin emerges as a response to that bitter experience. It strips away humanity's capacity for betrayal. No one can secretly print more, no one can deceive about the supply. You might hate Bitcoin, you might consider it dangerous, but you cannot deny its brutal honesty. And perhaps it is this honesty that many find hard to accept because it forces them to confront the truth about the money they are using, that dollars, euros, yen all can be printed infinitely, that the value of their labor is not as safe as they thought. Confronting the truth is always difficult, but once you look directly at it, you cannot turn away. Bitcoin is not a story of speculators seeking quick riches. It is a story of fairness, of trust rebuilt on immutable principles. That is why I believe the future will look back at this period and ask how we ever doubted. I must confess something. When I started writing these essays, I never imagined they would go this far. Initially, it was just a desire to share a perspective to explain why Bitcoin is important, but the deeper I wrote, the more I realized Bitcoin is not just a technological innovation. It is a revolution in thought. We are accustomed to the notion that currency is something granted by the state. From childhood, we are taught to trust central banks, that the value of money is always guaranteed. But Bitcoin forces us to ask why it must be so. Why should the value of billions of people's labor depend on the decisions of a few individuals? Why does trust equate to centralized power? Bitcoin answers with a paradigm shift. Instead of trusting people, trust mathematics, trust natural law. Instead of relying on promises, rely on a system that everyone can verify. This shift may sound dry, but it is profoundly humane. Because when you remove the arbitrariness of power, you restore fairness to each individual. And that is why I call Bitcoin one for all. It makes no distinction between rich and poor, nationality, status. It grants no special privileges to anyone. In a world fraught with injustice, Bitcoin is like a level playing field where all stand equal. This may be uncomfortable for those accustomed to privilege, but for the majority, it is the only opportunity to escape the silent oppression of inflation. Over the years, I have met countless individuals who entered the world of Bitcoin from very different paths. Some came for financial reasons, wanting to protect their assets. Some came for philosophical reasons, wanting to try a system that didn't require centralized trust. Some came simply out of curiosity. But whatever their initial reason, they all stayed because of the same realization. Bitcoin is a rare truth in a volatile world. And as I look back on that journey, I cannot help but feel grateful. Grateful to Satoshi, who sowed this seed and then quietly disappeared, leaving a gift to humanity. Grateful to those who believed early and protected this system, even when it was just a fragile idea. Grateful to the community, who not only wrote code, mined blocks, but also debated, questioned, and spread the belief. It is they who are the reason Bitcoin has endured so many storms and still stands strong. And so, like all journeys, it is time to conclude. But I do not see this as an end. For me, this is just a small milestone in an ongoing story. Bitcoin does not need me, nor does it need any individual. It will continue to exist because its nature is decentralized and immutable. That is what makes me believe that even if I put down my pen today, this story will continue to be written by millions, by billions of other people.